I often speak about the use of the passive verb ektiste in Colossians 1:16 to point out what it means. That someone else is creating in and through the firstborn. The firstborn is not presented as the creator there, which is why the passive verb is used, not the active form, for what is done in and through the firstborn. Right, so, but, talking about passive verbs and active verbs, it's sometimes any kind of grammar talk can get a little tricky for people. So I've come up with a good example to show that anyone can use and show the significance of the passive verb form in Colossians 1:16. Let me bring up, first of all, 1 Peter 3:22 in the New World Translation. It doesn't matter which translation. I just happen to have the New World Translation. I'll be using it tonight. You could use any translation to show what I'm about to show you, okay? Looks like it's all there. Let's move it over just a little bit. So 1 Peter 3:22, right here. Okay, take a look at that. Notice what it says. It's talking about Jesus, right? Resurrection of Jesus. He is at God's right hand. For he, Jesus, went his way to heaven, and angels and authorities and powers, right, just like the things that were created in and through him, according to Colossians 1:16, 17. Angels and authorities and powers were made subject to him. That's in the passive form. The verb, let me bring up the Greek text here. 1 Peter 3:22 in the Greek. That last part, were made subject to him, is hypatagenton auto. Hypatagenton is a form of the verb hypatasso, and it's in the passive form. It's in the plural, referring to the angels, authorities, and powers that were made subject to him, right? To Jesus. He's at God's right hand. He went his way to heaven, and angels and authorities and powers were made subject. Passive form of hypatasso. Were made subject to him, auto. Just like in Colossians 1:16, were created in him, ektiste and auto. So, do you see the relationship now between Colossians 1:16 and 1 Peter, which shows the use of the passive verb form in Colossians 1:16? It puts en auto before ektiste, but it's still the same thing, right? Were created in him, were subject to him, were made subject to him. They're both in the passive form, katizo and hypatasso. Now, go to 1 Corinthians, right? Aren't we told explicitly? We know that the passive verb form indicates that, but I want you to use 1 Peter 3:22, the passive form of hypatasso, to show the relationship between the passive form of katizo in Colossians 1:16 and how they both involve someone else doing something to or in him, Jesus. In the case of Colossians 1:16, creating in him. In the case of 1 Peter 3:22, making angels, authorities, and powers subject to him. Look at 1 Corinthians 15. look at what it says in verse 27. For God, God's in brackets because he's the understood subject, and you'll see that in just a second very clearly. For he subjected all things under his feet. But when he says that all things have been subjected, it is evident. It is with the exception of the one who subjected all things to him. Verse 28, but when all things have been subjected to him, then the Son himself will also subject himself to the one who subjected all things to him, that God may be all things to everyone. In 1 Corinthians 15:27, in the first part, when it says God subjected, that's in the active form. That's an active form of the same verb in 1 Peter 3:22, hypotasso, that's in the passive form. Okay? So here you have God doing the subjecting. And in 1 Peter 3:22, you have the subjecting being done by someone other than the Son, to whom all things are being subjected. In the second use of hypotasso, right here, when he says all things have been subjected, that's the passive form again. All things in this case are being subjected. Just like in 1 Peter 3:22, the angels, authorities, and powers, they would be included in the all things being subjected. So here you first have the use of hypotasso in the active, showing someone doing the subjecting. You then have a use of hypotasso in the passive, showing that things are being subjected, just like you have in 1 Peter 3:22, all things being subjected to the one at God's right hand. And here you have the one actively doing the subjecting explicitly distinguished from the Son, to whom all things are subjected, as God, as the one who is the obvious exception, right? So that when it says all things are being subjected to the Son, that obviously doesn't include the one who's doing the subjecting. So this is an outstanding way, I believe, for anybody to show. All you need to know is that the verb in 1 Peter 3:22, hypotasso, is used in the passive for what is being done to the angels, authorities, and powers to the Son. Someone is subjecting those to him. Just like in Colossians 1:16, someone is creating all things in him. And that one is shown right here as the active subject doing the subjecting, just like we know elsewhere, the same one is shown as doing the creating. The Son is never shown to be the active creator, the one who's katizo in the active sense. And so in 1 Corinthians 15:28, it explicitly refers to ha theos, the God. The God that the Word as a God was with in the beginning. In verse 28 of 1 Corinthians 15:28 is the one doing the subjecting. All things are being subjected, and the Son is distinct from the one subjecting, and obviously the things being subjected to him. Just like he's distinct from that one in 1 Peter 3:22, who's subjecting all angels, authorities, and powers to him, auto, and just like he's distinct from the one who's creating in him, en auto ektiste, because he's that one's firstborn, protatokos, the beginning, of that one's generative power. Deuteronomy 21:17. So with 1 Peter 3:22, 1 Corinthians 15:27 and 28, you can show how the passive verb hypotasso is used together with the active form, and show the difference in meaning, so that it's clear also that just like the Son is not doing the subjecting here or in 1 Peter 3:22, he's not doing the creating in Colossians 1:16.